Chapter 25. The Stupidest Smart Person. That's actually something I vividly remember someone calling me in middle school. I had a classmate who would always call me that. You are the stupidest smart person I know. Pujya Swamiji's words cut straight through the spiritual intoxication I'd been under for months. This is her guru speaking. I had been back in India for about 3 months, engaged in an ever-expanding definition of full-time service. What I did varied from day to day. I responded to letters Swamiji received. I sent follow-up letters to people who were overseeing various projects, mostly the Encyclopedia of Hinduism. What was the status of article collection or illustration matching? I also followed up on the schools we had adopted in a slum outside of Delhi and the curriculum of the free school on the ashram premises. I began to edit a book on the Bhagavad Gita and an encyclopedia on the teachings of Mira Alfasa, known to her followers as the Mother, and the founder of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, both written by brilliant Indian thinkers but checkered with spelling and grammatical mistakes. The authors had each approached Pujya Swamiji for the IHRF to publish their works, and he had handed me the manuscript, saying, "If you think they are good, we can publish them." The depth of the content took away my breath. As I read them page by page, I'd stop and let my tears flow, or I'd let myself drift into meditation. Good. They were the deepest books I'd ever read. But nearly every page had a plethora of spelling, grammatical, and stylistic errors. "Just fix them," Swamiji said, as though each book was a one-page memo and not 1,000 pages of dense text. "And then we'll publish them." I worked with printers and designers on brochures and pamphlets about our projects. The schools, the free medical clinic, the environmental, ecological, and animal protection programs. They should be informing and inspiring, Swamiji insisted. Not for fundraising. Whatever God wants us to have, He will send us. So, no perforated pages to mail in checks, just pictures and details of the work. Should people be inspired to donate, they would. Should they simply be inspired to say a prayer for the children or the hospital patients or the cows wandering along the road, that was fine too. A desk was set up for me in the storeroom, where I'd had my post-Reiki ecstatic initiation into the expansiveness of myself the previous autumn. A computer from the Delhi Encyclopedia of Hinduism office was sent to Rishikesh, so I could have an actual PC rather than the blue manual typewriter. I even had my own key. Each morning, one of the young men, the first on the scene, would unlock the outer door while he did the morning sweeping. I could then use my key to enter the storeroom/office from the public darshan room. I, who had to be coaxed and coerced, pushed and prodded to sit down and work, was suddenly at my desk before 7 in the morning. After morning prayers ended at 6, I got my coffee from the market and came to the office. I was also the ashram photographer. I had been an avid photographer since high school, so this role was natural for me. I always had my camera with me, and I became a photojournalist, jumping onto and off of stages gently, and sometimes not so gently, pushing people's shoulders out of the shot, feeling entitled to stand or sit anywhere. "Photographer," I would say, pointing to my camera as I jostled through the crowds to get whatever I had to shoot. That's your next life hack. When you're at your next concert, just bring a camera with you and say, "Photographer," then you can go to the front. Swamiji's smile when he saw me poised behind my lens assured me that I had every right to be there. Now, whether you get that smile from the people you're photographing, I guess you'll find out. I manage the photo processing and album production too, spending dozens of hours on the floor of my new office, arranging Kodak prints into albums for each event, one for us to keep at the ashram, and separate albums for each of the government officials and dignitaries who had participated. The lack of global relevance of my work never occurred to me, nor would it have bothered me if it had. I wasn't there to be globally relevant. I was there because it was home. I held Swamiji's comment about me teaching and touching millions in a corner of my mind that I rarely visited. It didn't matter. If I did end up doing something like that, well, great. If I spend the rest of my life typing his letters, coordinating schools for slum children, and taking and arranging photographs, that was more than enough. The sheer rightness of where I was made everything else right too. Each morning I woke up and knew I was home. People asked, and still ask, wasn't the transition difficult? Do you miss Western life and its comforts? I'd respond, imagine that you have size 8 feet. And your whole life, people have told you that you have size 5 feet. They were not being deceptive. They really believed your feet were size 5. So, you've always worn size 5 shoes. They were uncomfortable, and you developed blisters and corns, but you thought shoes were supposed to feel like that. And whenever you mentioned it to someone, they assured you that, yes, shoes always feel tight. Then, one day, someone slips your foot into a size 8 shoe. Ah, you say, so that's what shoes feel like. Yet, people continue to ask, how did you adapt to wearing a size 8 shoe? Do you miss the way that your size 5 shoes felt? Of course not. Coming back to India felt like slipping my size 8 foot onto a size 8 shoe. I awoke each morning before the prayers and, just as little children run into their parents' bed, cuddle under the covers and lie in mom's arms before starting their day, I rush down to Ganga, the holy river. The habit has stayed with me. Good morning, Ma. Oh, I think my internet disconnected me for a moment. For those watching the recording, I'm not sure if that'll be a problem, but for those who are listening in present time, I'll just wait until it has returned so I can continue where I left off for them. I think it has returned now. My internet. Do let me know. Am I back? I'm back. Okay, thank you. Coming back to India felt like slipping my size 8 foot into a size 8 shoe. I awoke each morning before the prayers and, just as little children run into their parents' bed, cuddle under the covers and lie in mom's arms before starting their day, I rush down to Ganga, the holy river. The habit has stayed with me. Good morning, Ma. I breathe into the wind as it whips off the Himalayas and onto her ceaselessly flowing waters. I bow to her and drink a handful of her divine nectar. I stand, her waters rushing over my bare feet, an IV of life and sacredness into my all-too-human morning sluggishness. I join my palms in prayers as the sun, rising over the Himalayas, begins to reflect off her boundless waters. Thank you, Ma. Thank you for waking me again today, for letting my eyes open in the land of your infinite grace. Thank you for making my legs able to carry me to your banks and then to my office. Thank you for bringing me forth to this life of service, this life of light, this life of love, this life of God. May my work today be in service of you. May you be the hand that guides mine. And most importantly, please, please let me be worthy of living on your banks. I had no idea when I would see Swamiji. Sometimes I saw him several times in a day. Maybe there was a meeting at which he wanted me to take minutes or notes. Maybe there was an event at which I got to be the photographer. Maybe he had some important work he needed done. And sometimes I didn't see him for days, except for the morning prayers and the evening arti. I no longer sat in the daily open darshans. There was too much to do. Whenever you want to see me, just send a message through one of these boys, he told me, and I will call you when I am free. It was rare, though, that I'd have a question urgent enough to warrant an unplanned meeting. It was okay, though. I could always hear him speaking to people in the open darshan, and his cushion was on the other side of my office wall. One morning, as I was sitting on the steps leading to Ganga in the early pre-prayers hour, around 4 or 4:30, suddenly he walked down the steps in front of me toward the river. I was surprised to see him alone. Every other time I'd seen him moving around the ashram, he had been surrounded by many people, devotees or his sevaks, servants. And there was always a buzz around him. Here, however, he seemed to float down the steps to the water. Pardon me. At first, I didn't even realize it was Swamiji, because he was all alone, his head gently lowered so that nothing should come into his vision other than Mother Ganga. He lay down prone on the marble of the ghat, legs straight behind him, arms straight in front of him, nearly parallel to Ganga herself, but ever so slightly turned towards her. There wasn't room on the steps for him to lie down facing her. He lowered his head onto the marble between his outstretched arms and lay there for a while. Although he was a few inches from the water, in the pre-dawn light it seemed to be washing over him. As a mother might pull the blankets over her child when he crawls into her bed in the early morn. Then, as he rose, the edge of the water seemed to recede. His hair and clothes were dry, so the water had not physically risen to cover him. And yet, for those moments, I'm certain I saw Mother Ganga's blanket cover him. After rising, he stepped into the river and walked, calmly and gracefully, as though the strength of the current had no impact on him. He walked several feet out into the water, and the water remained at calf height. Gazing up at the moon as it began its descent over the Ramjhula bridge and behind the Himalayas to give way to the sun waiting to rise, he closed his eyes and folded his hands at his chest in prayer. At that moment, there was no moon, no Ganga, no Swamiji, and no ghat. There was only child and mother. He had come home in the early hours of the morning to spend a few precious moments with his mother before beginning the day. The two had merged so completely and seamlessly that it was hard to imagine that a few moments before they had been water and man. As his dhoti floated behind him, lifted by the strength of her current, or the current of her strength, I would have sworn he had no legs, that he was not standing, but floating, immersed in and merged into the goddess Ganga. Suddenly I felt voyeuristic, as though watching a divine movie. I was witnessing the precious moments of Pujya Swamiji's union with his mother. Slowly and reluctantly, I turned toward the shadows and left, and his eyes were still closed. These were the perfect, pristine moments of my first months back. Then, suddenly, Someone said something negative about me, and it got back to me. In all the moments since I'd first arrived at the ashram, I had a few interactions with people. My conversations were relegated to simple instructions and requests. You eat lunch now. A new towel, please. Swamiji was the only one I really talked to, and days could go between our conversations. The only friends I had were the children of the ashram and the sons and daughters of those who worked there, the sweepers, cooks, cleaners, and gardeners. The children would hold my finger as we walked down to the arti each night and snuggle into my arms and lap. We couldn't communicate in words, but it didn't matter. We laughed, tickled, hugged, and loved. I had little to do with the other devotees and disciples. A passing namaste as we walked in the halls or the dining area was the extent of most interactions. Printers, designers, and photo developers were the ones I had the most conversation with. So, to discover that a long-time stalwart devotee had been criticizing me hurt deeply. She criticized not my words or actions, but my very presence. Why was I here? She wanted to know. Who was I? And what did I want with Swamiji? I didn't know anything about India or Indian culture and therefore couldn't possibly be of any real help. If Swamiji needed a secretary or a photographer, one should be hired for him and the American should be sent away. I went to Swamiji. I finally had an urgent reason to see him and said, "I have to go. It's all a mistake. This is not a good idea." I told him what had been discussed among the devotees over tea that day. "I am so sorry," I cried. These were not tears of truth or bliss, but of despair. My inherent uselessness had been unveiled. My inner unrightness had been discovered, and I needed to leave before I caused any more problems for him or the ashram. "You are the stupidest smart person I've ever met," he said calmly, staring at my teary eyes as I struggled to catch my breath. With the shock of a band-aid being ripped off, his words tore straight into the moment, through the drama, the story, and the plot, with all its characters and script. Despite having been back in India for months, living a life of spiritual ecstasy on the banks of the sacred Ganga river, despite indescribable experiences of divine oneness, that state of merging and melting into the universe, into the light that is possible only through grace, despite tears of bliss flowing down my face every day, despite being touched by a power and presence I had never imagined possible, I had, on that day, in the spring of 1997, reacted to a situation exactly as I always had, as a victimized, egocentric, grasping child. When Pujya Swamiji used the words stupid and smart in the same sentence, it was to startle me awake. He was referring to a true and deep intelligence, the presence of jnana, real wisdom, in my life. Although I was smart in IQ and also in the experiential understanding of truth of self and capital S self, I was still stupid, quote unquote, in my inability to bring that deep wisdom and experience into my patterned reactivity. I may have had wisdom, but I was unable to apply it consistently to my actions and reactions. I had burst into tears like a wounded 8-year-old. The fear, grasping, and yearning of yesterday felt like it was true and present today. My sense of not being enough had been triggered, and I was no longer a 26-year-old swimming in ecstasy, but a scared and wounded child. My buttons had been pushed, and I didn't have the tools or integration yet to know the difference between now and what my nervous system, which has no concept of time, felt was also now, but wasn't. In the 1980s, American Buddhist psychologist John Welwood coined the term spiritual bypass. When a person has a true, deep spiritual experience of oneness, wholeness, completeness, and divine presence, states of samadhi, bliss, or union in your meditation or prayers, or in the presence of your guru, it's easy to think that your inner work is complete. When we live in the world and have to relate to other people who have their own issues, challenges, fears, egos, and desires, at some point we realize that having had the deep ecstatic experience of the divine does not necessarily give us the tools to overcome the insecurities and neuroses that we've had since childhood. Experiences of grace do not exempt us from having to look at our own anger, jealousies, ego, and fears. We all know people who do dozens of rounds of japa, meditative repetition of a mantra or divine name on their mala every day, or spend hours in prayer, but are provoked by the slightest insult or upset. We see people who perform extensive worship in their own faith, yet are not able to get along with the people around them who are perhaps trapped in addiction or suffering themselves from insecurity and depression. Meditation, prayer, japa, puja, and kirtan are wonderful ways to help us connect to the divine and experience wholeness and perfection within the self, but they do not erase the imprints of childhood trauma. They give us a perspective that can pave the way for healing these traumas indeed, a deep, palpable experience that we are more than our childhoods, our addictions, our depression, and our fallible, victimized bodies. They connect us to a self that was never abused, victimized, betrayed, abandoned, or deprived. They give us a touch of the sun's warmth, but we still have to do the work of integrating these gifts of grace into the body and mind we have. It doesn't happen automatically. We might get a reprieve for a while as we dwell in these new states of bliss, but as Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield reminds us, after the ecstasy, the laundry. Psychological work without spiritual experience can become a quagmire of darkness. It's easy to sink into the quicksand of our own histories, our wounded identities, fears, and desires, and relive them over and over again. On the other hand, a deep and honest, dharmic, fearless inquiry into our motivations, reactions, compulsions, and anxieties can be a most helpful companion on the spiritual path. We can witness our anger, ego, and grasping, and the repetition of decades-old scripts with the deep presence of love and divine light, and discover our humanity to be more companionable with our spiritual insight than we'd ever imagined possible. Om Saraswatyai Namaha. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the patience of a couple internet disconnectivity issues along the way. What a powerful and profound chapter this has been. We'll pause reading there for now, but we can continue to reflect on how, even though one may have found the truth that they've longed for in the eternal journey, they still have yet to pull down aspects of those truths into applicable forms for us to carry our way as effortlessly as possible through the reality that human life is. Let us be inspired of all the work that we have to do still, and know that that's all part of the process too. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat.